Hi,
Good
everybody.
to
My
see
name is
people.
John Graves, and I want to welcome you all to this month's ArtistWorks Live, where I'm going to be talking with John Patitucci, our online jazz bass teacher here at ArtistWorks. We're going to be taking questions from you, the audience, so please get those questions ready. If you would please include your student name with your question, we'll qualify you to win a special prize at the end of the program today. All right, let's introduce our guest. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, and began playing bass at the age of 10. He's played with such artists as B.B. King, Chick Corea, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, George Benson, Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, Pat Metheny, just to name a few. Next month is going to mark 5 years that he's been teaching online bass here at ArtistWorks. Everyone welcome John Patitucci. Welcome, John.
Hey, how you guys doing?
So where are you joining us from today?
I'm just home for a change.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, it's great.
So you just been home for a few days now, just got off the road?
Yeah, I got home about a week ago, and yeah, so I caught up on my exchanges, and now I'm chilling.
There you go. All right, so just a quick note to the audience before we get started. Let me remind you guys that today's questions are going to be coming solely from you. So although time will only permit me to get to a small amount of these, please start sending them in now, and so that we can get to as many of them as possible. And like I said, include your name. We'll get you qualified for a little giveaway we're going to be doing at the end of the hour here. Great. So John, I see you're sitting at a piano there, and I know you have
Yes.
an electric bass right by you and an upright. Do you want to start us off with a little music in our ears before we get going?
Sure. Let me swivel it around.
Okay.
I'll do the acoustic bass first.
Cool. Good starting point.
Yep, we'll do something here. Let's see. Can you see this now? How's this? How's the angle? Yeah?
Yeah.
You can hear that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Let's do, I'm going to do a little bit of I Hear Rhapsody. Okay? Okay?
All right.
Here we go.
Beautiful.
Okay.
That's
Maybe
great.
I'm going to come back around again.
Yeah. Go ahead and swivel back around. Wow,
All right.
beautiful. Those hands were moving.
Oh, man, it's good to get moving a little bit today because I've been doing other things. But I did my first bass solo concert on this last trip,
Yeah.
which was kind of amazing. 60 minutes
Wow.
of bass.
Well, hey, so yeah, we had a chance to catch up a little bit before we went live here. Tell me a little bit more about, so you just got back from Europe, and I know you have a couple more tours, and that was with the Electric Quartet. You have a couple more tours coming up this summer. So tell me about what you've been up to and what you're going to be up to.
Well, the tour we did with the Electric Guitar Quartet, doing the music from Brooklyn, the record, man, we did I did personally 14 shows in 17 days. They had one day off while I went to do. There was one less day for them. They did 13 shows because I did one solo bass concert at this crazy Dutch double bass festival. That was great. I've been wanting to do that for years. That was exciting, but intense. 60 minutes all by yourself, with the bass. Right. But I did a bunch of different stuff, some blues stuff, some spirituals, some bebop, a little bit of everything, So then, I did that. I got back. I've been trying to catch up on rest. And then I'm going out with playing with the Children of the Light in New York at the Blue Note, June 13th or 18th, and then going out with Chick Corea for several weeks with the Electric. And then Wayne after that, and then it goes on and on. It's a little crazy.
So, but you've been at it for, does it still kind of wear you out, or is it just such a part of your life at this point because you've been at it for so long? How you do with those stretches, 14 shows in 17 days? This
one was harder than anything I've done in a while because it was my band. So I'm the road manager, the band leader, so that was pretty exhausting because we were doing, a lot of one-nighters. With Wayne, we don't do as many one-nighters because he's around 84 almost. So there's more days off.
Right.
But this was like, and so it was challenging physically.
Right.
Musically, it was a blast. We had a great time. But physically, it was very intense. After a while, you're like, wow, because, sometimes you're flying, sometimes we did some trains. We did at least one van drive or whatever, but, it's a lot of traveling.
Yeah, early mornings, late nights.
Yep.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, it's the stuff that my students, I try to tell them about it, but until they actually have that experience, it's difficult to prepare for that.
Right. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's get started on some of these questions that are rolling in. Washington Jim from Seattle says, hi, John. Please talk about hallmarks of a good melody in context of a solo with a beginning, middle, and end. Thanks.
Well, melodies, as a teacher, melodies are one of the more challenging things to teach your students to do. And what I try to point people towards is the idea of becoming a storyteller. And, and start with, just like when somebody's talking to you, they'll start with like a little motif, like a couple of words, and then it builds into a sentence. And from there, it can build into a few sentences. And then it becomes a paragraph. And then it becomes a few paragraphs. And then it becomes a page. And then it becomes a chapter. Mm-hmm. I think the idea of breathing and saying something and then developing it, that's what melodies are about. Like if I'm on the piano, like I play. So that's a great melody. Melodies have skips in them too. There's some scale stuff, but then there's some skips. That's a lyrical. So it's a question and an answer too. This is, I hear Rhapsody. Here's the question. And then, now here's the answer. So it's kind of like a question and answer thing. Breathing, like horn players breathe naturally. They have to breathe before they do their next phrase. Sometimes on string instruments, we don't breathe enough because we just kind of run stuff. Or piano players are guilty of that sometimes too. So a good melody has skips in it. It has breath. It has compositional, expansion. You start with something and then you kind of develop it. And so it's just like a great blues guitarist. You hear them play and they're speaking to you. They play a lick, there's some space, and they say something else, and they build it and build it. And so that to me is how you sort of start with an idea, and then you build it and develop it, and then you get to a middle point, and then you keep developing, and then you can get to an end point. That's sort of a standard classic way to build a solo. You have a sort of an introduction, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And even though it's a cliche at this point, usually the arc is upward. You build an intensity until everybody's screaming, and then you finish your thing, and then hopefully everybody claps. That's one way.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Not the only one.
That's good. Well, thanks, Jim, for that question. This one is from, this is Dick from Cincinnati. He's curious just how to make, this is a great question, how to make practicing scales more enjoyable. It says he always gets stuck on that, but he knows it's essential to get them all down in all keys.
Okay. I'm going to get the bass out now. Let's go the other way. So I like to give this example. C major down low on the bass. This is nothing that anybody can't work on, right? So C major. So we have these notes. So I practice them, the scale, sometimes from the lowest note that I can find on the instrument that fits. So here we have a low E, which is the third in C major. So I have these notes available. So I'm just going to play down on the bottom of the bass. Now, my classical teachers taught me something really important. That is, even when you're playing a scale, you should make it sound like it's the most beautiful piece of music you ever heard. Now, you can also do things with skips. Just skip around and see if you can find some things. Because remember, the way to make a good melody is to have some skips. So maybe I would challenge myself, knowing, I've practiced the fingerings that allow me to play these notes in succession, right? That's one thing. You have to practice it slowly so that you can, so you know where the notes are, right? But then there's a thing of like using your imagination. Just with those notes, let's do a melody. So practice, can you make a melody happen? Like, you notice what I did? I gave you something, and then I tried to expand it, then make an answer to it. That's a way to practice those notes. And you can take just those notes, and you can do a lot with them. You can make melodies move quicker. You can go. Now, I haven't played any chromatic notes at all, just the notes in the C scale. So I'm just working with the notes in the C scale. This is a very good test of our imagination. Just taking something basic like a scale and then do it in another key in that same place. And so how creative can you be? Can you make a melody in another kind of time feel or another kind of music? I'm kind of doing it in a jazzy way,
Right. And you said you wanted to stay kind of just right at the kind of first position there.
Yeah.
Is it better to just start simple like that and just kind of challenge yourself just with 4 or 5 or 7 notes and make a melody out of that?
I think so, because I think sometimes when we've been playing for a while, we fall into traps like we can only be creative if we jump to this part of the neck or we do this, and then we have little patterns that we get stuck to like safety blankets, and we don't really know the neck actually.
Yeah, I saw one of our other instructors doing something where it was just 4 notes.
Yeah.
Kind of showed 4 notes but did a really incredible bluesy guitar solo out of just 4 notes.
Totally.
And I think if you were to just close your eyes and kind of turn around, you would never even imagine that something so big and beautiful came out of such a tiny little section of the neck, you know. And so yeah, it seems like a very cool a challenge to, and again, like this guy asked, you know, it's like you're eating your veggies, but they're still tasty, you know. It's working on your scales, but it's still fun, you know.
I think so, and also I was combining some of the arpeggios inside the scale to make it interesting.
Right. Very cool. All right, so this one comes from a sax. One of Eric's students says, as a sax player, I want to know how to communicate better with bass players. What do I need to know about different styles?
Okay, we can do that without. All right, now you have to do some homework then. I mean, depending on which styles you're into. Like just say, let's say we'll talk about the acoustic and the electric bass, basic ideas. It would be good for a saxophone player to like know a little bit about stylistically, like some of the guys that really kind of changed the instrument. You know, in acoustic bass, people talk about Jimmy Blanton, who was very young and who died very young, who played with Duke Ellington, who's one of the first guys to really stretch out on the bass. Then obviously Ray Brown, Oscar Pettiford, and then Ray Brown. Ray Brown was like a huge, you know, figure in the acoustic bass. Ron Carter, Niels Pedersen, Eddie Gomez, Dave Holland, and they all had a different place in history and time period. So you kind of have to know a little bit, depending on what music you're into. I don't know what the saxophone player likes to play. And then there's electric bass. There are guys obviously like James Jamerson, Monk Montgomery. Those were the first guys who picked up the instrument. They were acoustic bass players who made the transition to adapting this new instrument that was created in the 1950s, 1951, the first electric bass, which is wild because I was born 8 years later. It's kind of crazy. But so then like the Motown period, you have James Jamerson and then Chuck Rainey and all these guys that came after that, and people like Willie Weeks. And then down in Memphis, Duck Dunn. And then in rock and roll, you had guys like Paul McCartney. You had guys like John Entwistle. You know, you kind of have to listen to a lot of different kinds of music and actually start listening to the bass player. A lot of times, horn players, they don't know how to talk to a bass player because they haven't really checked out what the bass player is doing. And bass is a funny instrument until it's gone. Sometimes people don't know what it was doing. But you take it away, and all of a sudden the music has this big hole in it, and they're like, wait, what happened? Well, a lot's happening down there. It just depends on how much you're listening to it. But the bass, you know, in all kind of music, the basic thing you're looking for is the bass is the intersection of the groove, the rhythmic, the harmonic implications of the music. It's compositional, it's counterpoint to the melody. It's a whole lot of stuff going on down there. And it's a challenge for the bass players to create something really strong without being too busy.
Yep.
That's our job, is to lay that framework without oversaturating the music with too much stuff, so that there's room for the harmony to sound, there's room for the lines, the melodies, the harmony parts, the counterpoint that goes in there. And so it's I think for horn players and guitar players and singers and instrumentals, piano players, it's always interesting to hear them after they started to really check out bass. Some of them are blown away by all that it is. They just never thought of it. So in order to talk to your bass player intelligently, then you have to kind of really listen to what the function is, listen to different kind of musics, listen to people talk. I mean, nowadays you can go on YouTube and go, okay, Ray Brown masterclass, boom. And all of a sudden you see Ray Brown, like from 1970, teaching somebody about the bass. You can come on ArtistWorks and look at all the cats. We got 3 bass players already.
So you named a lot of bass players just now, and a lot of them are outside of the world of jazz. How important is it for someone? I mean, if that student that asked that question is pursuing jazz specifically, how important is it for somebody to learn the language of jazz and really immerse themselves in that, but then also keep parts of their brain outside and continue to explore genres outside of the one that they're directly pursuing?
I think it's important because for me, being such involved in African American art form, like the culture that jazz came out of, which also is the culture that blues came out of, which influenced rock and roll, which influenced soul music, which influenced, and the church music, the gospel music that was part of blues. And that sort of like laid the groundwork for so much of the music that we have here in America. And also what the British cats really tripped out on and freaked out and loved, which was the basis for their music, like the Beatles. Those guys were total blues, like historians. And that music is also connected to jazz. So it's a lot of things that at first maybe don't seem related, but the more you read about the players, there was a lot of jazz musicians, like the guys that played for James Brown or the guys that played on those Motown records. A lot of them were jazz guys. They were playing bebop gigs at night and making hit records in the daytime.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, actually.
That's pretty cool. All right, this one's from Tom Norman. Just says, so another question regarding practice. So practice, how do you split your time? And then just how do you split your time in practicing? And then also best 5 beginner tunes to learn.
Okay, splitting the time practicing has taken on different looks with each decade of my life, I think. When I was younger, because now I'm going to be 58 in December, so I've been playing bass, 48 years almost. And so when I first started playing, I was so fired up. I had the bass in my hand hours a day, listening to records, learning things from records. Then I learned how to read music because my teacher made me. And then I started learning tunes. When I was a teenager, I had an old jazz musician who used to pick me up and take me to gigs. And he would take me on a gig and just start calling tunes. I didn't know any tunes. So he would just call the tunes. I had to learn them by ear. So I had the bass in my hand. I was learning things. Then my brother started showing me all the chord forms so I knew my arpeggios on the electric bass, and learned what was a major 7, what was a minor 7, what was a dominant 7, what was a diminished, what was an augmented. I learned these things pretty young. Then I got into jazz and started learning about the language of bebop. And then I was also learning about funk and grooves, and then slapping came in. I mean, I was practicing so much stuff, and then at 15 I took up the double bass, and all of a sudden I had to play with the bow, started learning classical music. And then when I went to college, I was a classical major. For those 3 years, I was focusing a lot on the classical studies and then playing gigs at night, playing all that other music. So I had the bass in my hand like all the time, basically.
Wow.
And that went like that for quite a long time until I got married, and then had kids, and then it changes, as you know. So then you have a wife and you have children, and then I was teaching too. So that, my practice routine now, it depends on very much the gig that I'm preparing for. And so right now I have a classical kind of tango gig with this crazy Uruguayan pianist named Gustavo Casaneve. My wife and I are playing. So I'm going to be working on acoustic bass, pizzicato, and with the bow, some intense music. A lot of it's written. Some of it's improvised. And then after that's over, I think that gig's on the 9th. After that, I'll be playing trio with Brian and Danilo Perez, and I'll be playing both instruments, playing grooves, playing African stuff, playing jazz, improvising, and some odd meter. So I'll be kind of getting my head into that and practicing whatever I feel like I'm weak in for that gig. And then I go on the road with Chick. So then it's all that electric stuff. So it varies now. It used to be more like, okay, practice scales, arpeggios, practice reading music, transcribing.
Yeah.
I still transcribe though when I hear something.
So go into that a little bit more, because I think some of the people that you're talking to right now may not have any gigs lined up, and they might already have some kids, and they're already kind of in that part of their life, and this is just kind of maybe a hobby for them, or maybe they're just gig every now and then. So for someone, they're less focused on preparing for a specific gig, but they mostly want to just make sure they're getting the most out of their practice time.
I would say if you put in an hour a day for somebody like that, every day, you'll get better much faster than if you practice an hour on Monday and then you don't touch the instrument until Thursday.
Right.
Play 3 hours. It's really about every day having a contact, even if it's a half an hour a day, but focused and not just noodling. Working on things you can't do yet. That's why you practice. There's some, obviously, when you're learning the instrument, there's some discovery, and you want to have that free time where you can, wow, what does this feel like? What does this sound like? You know, the experimental stuff. But then, then there's the inevitable. You have to learn how to deal with the instrument. You have to know where everything is. So that means scales, arpeggios, sound production, time, rhythm, feel. Those things are kind of non-negotiables. So you have to split that little hour in small little 15-minute increments. And I think for somebody who's doing it like that and they already have all this other stuff in their life, you spread your practice routine over a week's time. For most people, I think that's better. Even students who are studying at music school. You can't possibly hit everything every day.
Yep.
You have to stretch it out over a week.
It's like going to the gym. You have like arms day and then leg day.
Yeah. I believe in that. I believe I don't think you can do it all. I mean, my way around that when I was younger was I just practiced all the time. So I did quite a bit every day. I had the instrument in my hand all the time.
Right.
I didn't have much of a life, for a while. So.
Yeah. And then you mentioned something about transcribing.
Yeah, because I think, music and whatever style you're interested in, it's like learning a foreign language. Not only do you have to learn kind of the way it sounds and the way it feels, you got to speak with the right accent. You have to learn what's idiomatic for that style, what kind of expressive nuances are common. Like in funk, there's a different set of inflectives a lot of times than there is in, say, if you're a bass player and you want to play in Nashville and play country music. You won't use the same inflections that you will if you're in a band that's playing James Brown's music,
right,
or Sly and the Family Stone's music. Or if you want to play bebop, there's another language to learn. And so you have to dive in, and it's kind of like a sequential thing. First, you immerse yourself by listening, and then you imitate. And then later on, hopefully, maybe you'll get to kind of figure it out coming through your lens, and maybe even you'll innovate someday, but that's not a guarantee.
Right.
Oops, sorry.
Hey, so how, speaking of the piano, how has it helped you just learning the overall language of music and visualizing it and looking at your fretboard by learning the piano or knowing multiple instruments? I mean, would you recommend that to somebody? Or, I mean, we had a question somebody asked earlier. I haven't got to it yet, but somebody asked that, would it do them more justice to just focus more on the bass or to split the time and learn the piano?
It depends on where they're at and how long they've been playing. I make my students deal with some piano because harmonically, they have to know what the sounds sound like. They have to know what music sounds like, and the piano is one of the easiest instruments to express the whole thing on. Like if you can sit down and play a song on the piano, you got all of it right there. and you have to learn rhythm because you have to make it fit rhythmically. You have to learn voicings, the melodies. I started playing piano because my brother started studying music at college, and I was about 15 because he's 3 years older than me. He was about 18 when he went to college. So finally, we had a spinet piano in the house. I had never had access to a piano really before that. So I started getting into it. I learned how to hear changes and learn about how music's put together. The piano is so visual. You can see all the arpeggios, the scales, the patterns. It's so easy. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot, and it helped me hear sounds that are more like in jazz. We have a lot of big sounding chords. It's not just major chords and minor chords. It's dominant chords with alterations. It's, you know, minor 7 flat 5 chords with 9s and 11s on them, and there's a lot of sounds that if you're able to just put your fingers down on the piano, you can hear the whole sound. Whereas on bass, it's kind of hard to play this sound. You know, that's a minor 7 flat 5 chord, but it's a Herbie Hancock voice. So it sounds like a whole universe. Whereas if you play that on your bass and you just go like, and you just do the arpeggio, it doesn't sound like this. You know, that's the first chord. Somebody asked which tunes you learn. Stella by Starlight. You know, anyway. So those kind of tunes are like standard tunes, like I would say Just Friends, Stella by Starlight, Body and Soul, tunes like Bye Bye Blackbird, you know, those kind of tunes that are very, you know, 8 bars, A section, another 8 bars, and then the bridge is 8 bars, you know, a lot of, you know, forms that are classic, you know, tune shows kind of thing.
Great.
Yeah.
This one's from Rick Spencer. He says, Hi, John. I'm considering taking up electric bass, but would like to understand in what situations or what styles do you decide to switch from electric to acoustic?
Well, a lot of times it depends on who you're playing with. A lot of older bebop guys, they just want to hear the acoustic bass when they're playing standards, like we were just talking about, those kind of tunes. And if you're playing in a band that plays R&B music from the 60s and the 70s, people will want to hear the electric bass, or rock and roll music, typically electric bass. If you're playing Latin music, sometimes, which is a terrible generic term, Latin music. It's, which one do you mean? You know, if you're playing in a Puerto Rican band and you're playing salsa and, like, you know, mambo and all that kind of stuff, you know, guys sometimes they use one of those Ampeg baby basses, which is like a solid kind of electric acoustic bass, or they'll play acoustic, or they'll play electric. It just depends on the kind of music and the sound you're going for. Then after a while, like for me, it was interesting because the reason why I did the record Brooklyn is because when I first started hearing all kind of music, I only had electric bass. So everything was filtered through the electric. R&B, rock and roll, blues, bebop. That's all I had. So that's why, so I think that was kind of cool because it made me have to adapt and use my imagination to try to get different sounds out of the one instrument that I had.
Wow, yeah. So in that case, maybe being limited maybe was, you know, productive or to your benefit because you had, like you said, you had to use your imagination.
Yeah. And then when I had my hands 5 years later on an acoustic bass, it was like, oh, wow, this is how they do that thing. Oh, this feels easy. Now, you know what, not easy in quotes. Of course, it had all this other physical, you know, stuff that I didn't encounter before. But the instrument seemed to be made to swing, you know.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't originally made for that. It was made to play in an orchestra.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's keep moving here. So Brian G. from California says, how did you break into the business at a young age? I'm sure it's a lot different now with, you know, social media and everyone having to be their own marketing team. But, you know, how did you do it back then?
You know, I had my head down. I was working so hard about trying to be the best I could. I didn't know, you know, we didn't really have that kind of marketing awareness in those days, but I did hear from a lot of older players. One thing was for sure, I started as an ear player, and my mentor, this guy named Chris Paler in the Bay Area, actually, he was saying, okay, you got to learn how to read music because you're going to be limited. That was one thing that was really important, because then I was able to have a career in the studios in Los Angeles because I could read fast. When I first started, I couldn't read anything. I was terrible. I had my ear, so having a good ear is very important. Having a good time feel is important. Being able to play different styles was important for me because I was more, I think I became a lot more flexible in different styles than a lot of guys in my age group. Because a lot of guys they would be specific and kind of specialize. There were guys that played really good funk. There were guys that played only acoustic bass. There were guys that played Latin music only. There were guys that played Brazilian music. There were guys that played Puerto Rican music. You know, there were a lot of specialized guys, but not a lot of guys who were flexible doing a lot of different stuff.
Right.
So that became my thing, wanting to be involved in a lot of different kinds of music and enjoying studying all different styles.
So it sounds like breaking into the business back then, at least, didn't necessarily involve being business savvy. It just involved being incredibly well-rounded and diverse as a musician.
Yeah, in LA for sure at that time. And the other thing too is I was really into all kind of stuff I was practicing, and it helped me to be involved in the studios. Was a very specific set of skills too. You had to be fast, you had to have a great sound, you had to have a great time, be able to play with click tracks. And on the acoustic bass, you also had to be able to play with a bow to sit in a section and play classical stuff, kind of. So that was like a really broad thing that I was into. And I was doing it because I dug it. You know, it wasn't so much like, well, I just need to do this so I can do studio work. No, I mean, of course I want to get in the studios, but I also dug, you know, playing a lot of different kinds of music. So there was the interpretive thing, being able to interpret and playing a lot of different styles, strong at reading, being able to deal with the studio and the pressures of having to nail it right now. Come up with parts, like for the pop stuff, it was like, can you come up with a part now? Here's the tune, here's the singer-songwriter, all you have is some chord changes. Come up with the hook, you know, come up with something that makes a song work. So that was big, important. And some of my friends, my older friends, were really good at giving me advice because they said, yeah, we know you're into blowing and all the stretching out and everything, but you need to be able to play really simple and make people feel great. Wow. And that was some of the best advice I got.
I think that still applies today.
Every kind of music needs that. So
how would you say, if you can speak to this, how would you say everything you just described, how would you say that that's changed for, you know, the musician who's up and coming right now, 2017, and trying to break into the business?
I think back then there were more opportunities, at least back at that time in Los Angeles, to break in, kind of, because there were more older musicians that were hiring younger guys and mentoring them. You know, even in something that was viewed as less pop and less lucrative, like jazz, there are people like Chick Corea who still has young musicians and trains them. But you know, I play with Freddie Hubbard, Hubert Laws, Joe Farrell, Victor Feldman, you know, all these different people that would hire young cats and kind of like, you know, tell them what's up. Right. You know? And so it's not as easy with that as it used to be because there's not as many places to play. Right. So now sometimes what's taking the place of that is educational environments. Like when we teach at Berkeley, you know, sometimes we can mentor somebody and then maybe if they're good enough, we'll hire them later. Right. Or you know, at the online school, I'm trying to mentor people to get them ready for their opportunities, whatever that might be. So education has sort of filled in a gap of some of the mentor bands that used to exist. It's trickier now in that regard because there's not as many gigs, but still, you know, I always tell some people, you know, there are still bands out there playing. There are still, you know, it depends. You know, you have to be willing to do what I did, which was I took every single kind of gig, from Elvis impersonators to Mexican cumbia wedding bands to whatever I did, and I learned a lot.
Yeah. So
you know,
I don't think I mean, everyone would agree that the internet and social media have changed things too, but I think some people would say it's helped it. Some people would say it's hurt it.
right.
What do you think?
It's both, because I think sometimes it's great to be able to dial up videos of Wes Montgomery or somebody who you couldn't even see before and go, wow, watch them play. That's really cool.
Yeah.
The problem sometimes with younger players is they think if they've seen somebody do it, then they can do it already. Just because they've seen it. You know, oh yeah, I know that. It's like, really? Can you do that? I don't think so. It's like, you know, Danilo Perez, my buddy, one time was teaching a class and he played them some Coltrane thing that was unbelievable. And he said, well, what do you think about that? And one kid goes, yeah, it's cool. It's like, it's cool? That's all? Blasé, like, oh yeah, it's cool. Coltrane, the most important, maybe most influential jazz musician, you know, of that whole era. And cool, you know, really? You know, weren't you excited by that? Aren't you passionate about what you're, it's like, I think there's so much information and so much access that people are getting real blasé about it. That's the downside.
Interesting.
The upside is we have ArtistWorks. You can study online. That was possible before. You didn't have access to a whole curriculum, play-alongs, a whole downloadable book of a bass book or a guitar book or whatever. I mean, that just didn't happen.
Yeah. And you didn't have access to John Patitucci unless you wanted to fly and meet him.
Well, maybe, you know, maybe you didn't want to have access to him. But the other thing too is I think sometimes, which I see, there's the pressure that some of my young students feel like they have to know everything, which we didn't have quite the same vibe on that because we were kicking and scratching just to find the information and locate it, and you know, whereas now, because it's available kind of in a broad way, people feel like they're expected to know all of it.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's all right. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you did a solo concert in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Someone's just asking if there's any video available from that concert because they'd like to share.
You know, I don't know. I'm going to ask. I know that they were filming like crazy and they were doing all kind of stuff.
Okay.
I haven't received it yet. I would like to have a copy just for my own posterity. But
right.
Yeah, I plan on eventually doing a record anyway. I've been wanting to do one for years. You know, Dave Holland's a friend of mine, and he did 2 solo bass albums and quite a few solo bass concerts over the years around. So he's been very, very supportive of this idea that I've had to do. And as a matter of fact, I was in contact with him after I did it. I said, I actually did one, man. And he was he was like, yeah, that's great. You know, he's very cool. So
cool. Very nice. So this one is coming from, let's see. What is the role of practicing modes? How can you apply them in your playing? And then says, I can't wait to hear you live with Chick Corea in Romania.
You know, I learned modes when I was younger, but there was a couple of ways. As an acoustic bass player, my teacher used to teach us to practice the modes, and that was more of like to get fingerings of the scale all the way up the bass, starting on different tones of the scale. In that sense, it was a technical foundation thing. You had to learn how to finger out modes because in different keys on the acoustic bass, it totally changes. Your fingerings change. So it was good to learn the neck. On electric bass, initially it was good to learn the neck too, but I think until I started to see that I wasn't a big mode guy. as like some people really use them always in their improvising. For me, it was about realizing how one scale, I think of the whole neck as one scale. So instead of saying, well, now I'm going to use the third mode of the G melodic minor scale to play a B flat Lydian augmented. Like some people are really into, like I say, oh, I'm playing G melodic minor over that B flat major 7 with a sharp 5 because I memorized it as like a theorem kind of thing. Whenever I have a major 7 sharp 5, go down to the relative minor, play melodic minor, boom, I'm done. Instead of going, well, yeah, that's the third mode of the G melodic minor, and the second mode is this. And I mean, that's all useful stuff. But everybody has a different way to look at it when they improvise. Some people are really into the modal thing. For me, it's interesting to me, I use it as a way to simplify things. This one sound can be used against all these other chords, no matter where I am on the instrument. Because if you pick one sound, it's the same scale. You're just starting from different places. That's how you get modes.
Right.
So I tend to think the opposite way. I like to make it more global. Like, okay, you can use a G melodic minor for G minor major 7. You can also use it for B flat major 7 sharp 5. You can also use it for C13 with a plus 11, you know, like that.
Right.
You know, that's the way I kind of think of it.
Pretty intimidating to someone who's just getting ready to try to approach all that stuff.
Well,
all of a sudden it's like, are you still speaking the English language?
Well, exactly. And that didn't happen overnight. I mean, I've been dealing with music for, since I started playing electric when I was 10. So that's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, like 48 years ago.
Yes.
So yeah, you don't just start talking like that overnight. I mean, it takes decades.
Yeah.
And you don't have to learn it all tonight either. You know, you have time, you know, but yes, more deeply, I was the type of person who, even though I started as an ear player, I got fascinated by the sounds of things. Because to me, okay, here, that sounds like Greek, right? But when you hear it, here's like a minor major 7, a G minor major 7. That's a sound everybody's heard. So here's the melodic minor. Now, that's a pretty sound, but also here's that B flat major 7 with the sharp 5. Kind of an exotic sound, but that same scale works over it. So once you start to connect with it emotionally, oh, that's that sound. I kind of like that sound.
Yeah.
You memorize the sound, and then it's not really just a theoretical, like bookish thing. It's like, no, that's a vibe for me.
Yeah, it's a feeling.
Yeah, it's a vibe. It's like,
yeah, cool. Okay, so this person says, what is his name? Alien Life Form says, I'm playing 30s jazz, gypsy jazz, about 5 gigs a week, and I want to improve my solos. I'm a slow reader with an average ear, and I'm starting to learn the melodies. Any tips on improving solos?
wow, that's a specific stylistic kind of solo. If you're doing 30s, it's a swing oriented. That's the swing era. Anything pre-40s is still swing era. 1940s is when bebop came in. Charlie Parker, totally different kind of thing. I would say my first inclination would be to have you listen to some old recordings with Slam Stewart playing bass, who was amazing. He used to play with the bow and hum 2 octaves higher. It was like amazing. He played with Benny Goodman. He played on Groovin' High, that famous tune by Charlie Parker, because he kind of went into the 40s and lived decades after that. He was an amazing guy. he's kind of an interesting guy to listen to because he's still playing swing era language, even in the bebop period. But for the 30s, you know, Louis Armstrong, listen to Louis Armstrong, learn his solos. They're very melodic. Lester Young, beautiful. That kind of thing, you know, where the solos are very rhythmic, and they're very, you know, there's a lot of breath and a lot of kind of taking something, a motif, and developing it. You know, some guys in the 30s, they might go, you know, and that's the solo mic, you know. You know, they stay around a thing, and it's very, very powerful and driving, but it's also very direct. And I think there's a lot of, sometimes I think when you learn about different periods of music and you learn periods that come afterwards, it's easy to become a snob and say, well, you know, that was the swing era. That's like real basic. No, man, that stuff is deep. And the power that those guys play with, whoa.
Cool.
You know, sometimes we hide behind more notes because we don't have the essence that they had. And so Louis Armstrong, Lester Young, man, Slam Stewart, that's some incredible stuff. So I would say Gypsy Jazz, I mean, that's like Django Reinhardt too. And maybe if you like guitar, Charlie Christian was a swing era, you know, guitarist. I gotta confess, the Gypsy stuff, I don't really listen to that much. I respect it. And I love, you know, I obviously Django Reinhardt, great. That has not been as enduring a passion of mine, let's just say. But I do like it. I just don't play it that much. The other thing is, if you're going to play in a band like that, you're probably going to play a acoustic bass, and you're going to play shorter notes. So your setup can be more traditional, maybe even gut strings, higher action. So it's thumpy. It's almost like a march drum playing. That's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very rhythmic and powerful. It's cool.
It is cool. Yeah. All right. So we're only got a few minutes left here, so I'm going to try to get to as many of these as I can. So this is from P. Smith, and it's another practice-related question, just kind of dividing your time. So how do you recommend structuring a practice session? For example, X% on scales and arpeggios, Y% on exercises and etudes, Z% on learning a new tune. Okay.
It's interesting whenever somebody asks about these practicing things, rarely do they talk about rhythm. Rarely. And that is number one, practicing your time. Practicing your time. That means practicing with records. That means practicing with a metronome. Playing music, not just scales and arpeggios. Scales and arpeggios, don't get me wrong, are important. But practicing bass lines. I would say practicing your scales and arpeggios is important for some warm-up, maybe, you know, 15 minutes, some scales, 15 minutes, some arpeggios. Practice rhythm. Practice like a bass line, whether it's a walking bass line or a groove like an R&B bass line. Practice with a click or with a record. I make my students play some drums, like actually practice ride cymbal with a record.
Cool.
Do that for a half an hour, you know, and physicalize the time, like, you know, make it. So I would say, whereas the scales and arpeggios are absolutely important, I know so many people who learn their scales and arpeggios and know everything, but have bad time. So then all those notes that you learn in scales and arpeggios are rendered useless because you can't play in time. So remember to prioritize rhythm. We talk about it a lot on the site. I have, you know, there's 6-8 things to learn about African rhythms. There's I talk about getting Drum Genius as an app to play with, which just has all these different grooves in different tempos. Practice everything you do in time. If you practice your scales, practice them to a groove. Practice your arpeggios, practice them in time. Do as much in time as possible. And so if you have 2 hours of practice a night that's available, 15 minutes scales, 15 minutes arpeggios in time. Practice bass lines. So that's for another half an hour. So there's an hour gone already, right? And then there's, practicing, let's say, do a transcription, learn a bass line from a record. That might take another half an hour. And then you got half an hour left. Study harmony. So the transcription, a bass line will help you with your ear training. And then harmony, work on learning chords, learning what makes up each chord quality, a major quality, dominant seventh qualities, minor qualities, half diminished qualities, augmented qualities. Those are things you kind of need to know all this stuff. So I would break it up over a week. So some days you're gonna do 15 minutes of scales and 15 minutes of arpeggios. Some days you might spend a half an hour on the arpeggios and make a smaller time for the transcription or whatever.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, just with just a few minutes left here, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask at the end of every one of these little conversations I have every month. I've heard it emphasized so many times from so many teachers that there's really no destination. You're never done. You're always learning. Even the greatest teachers are also students and still learning, which means that you're always moving, you're always developing, changing, and growing. So, a year from now, 5 years from now, where would you like to see yourself? What are some of your current goals as a musician?
I want to do more solo concerts too. That's one thing that's newer for me. I want to get better at my polyrhythmic stuff. I've been working with Danilo Perez on, African polyrhythmic exercises. Get better, more comfortable at playing some of the odd meter music that people write now. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of it, but I'd like to become freer doing that. Better at some of the classical stuff that I do. And then have a deeper pocket for the groove stuff. Like I'm always trying to, get my blues stuff and my funk stuff really even more deep. Swing stuff too. Freer at improvising, have a bigger sound. I always have stuff that I'm working on.
Yeah.
Always.
But that's important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of one of the points I make by asking that question is I think might be powerful for a student who's watching a teacher that they hold in such high regard to find out that even they still have these goals and these challenges and these things they're working on. Makes it less kind of discouraging for a student
right.
learning,
I try to encourage my students to look at it like a continuum. It's like a line going from left to right, say. And no matter where you are on the line, you're still going in the same direction. And the line is your whole life. That's your whole life, that line that you're going to tread on and still trying to work on things and trying to refine or discover some new things, work on, there's always something that you can't do. Or it's always, and what makes it interesting is you always hear somebody else do something and you go, wow, I love that. When they do that, I wish I could do that better. I hear a bass player play something and I go, wow, how do they do that so well? I need to learn how to do that better. And the more you are open to people all over the world, because there's players all over the place doing all kind of crazy stuff now, the more you can get inspired by that instead of freaking out and going, oh, wait a minute, it should be a motivating thing as opposed to like a depressing thing.
Yeah. All right, John Patitucci, thank you so much for, taking this hour with us today. And I'm sure, I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. We appreciate it. We know how busy you are. So
we should do it more often. We'll do it again.
Cool. And thanks to all the students. I'm sorry I didn't get to all these questions, but we really appreciate everyone's participation. and just kind of joining us today and being a part of this live event that will live on the internet for a long time to come. But there was a select few of you that actually kind of joined in and participated and were a part of this conversation. We really appreciate it. We're going to give some free time away to one of you guys who participated today, and the winner will be Richard Males from Cincinnati. So thank you for participating, and our customer service department will reach out with you and get you all hooked up with some extra time on your current subscription. So thanks again to John Patitucci. It's always great talking with you. And
thanks, John. You're the best.
We wish you luck on all this crazy summer you have ahead of you and all your traveling and all these challenges you're taking on. It's great stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Alrighty, and to the viewers, I'll see you guys next month. We'll be doing it again. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Big John.